grown about 7 years old, which is absolutely crazy. I'm going to give you the quick and dirty because I'd rather spend the time really, getting into the brain. But really, my journey has been very simple. And it was just years ago, just at a conference, I was opening for a keynote. They were talking about the brain, and I was like, holy moly, how did I never think about this before? I was like, okay, I've been in learning for years. I was a teacher in the classroom. I was in learning and development as an instructional designer. And I was like, I need to know everything that there is to know, because why didn't I think about this? But then as I started learning more about the brain, I was like, whoa, how did I not know this? Like, I'm in learning. I'm here to help people learn, and I don't really know about this thing doing the learning. So it was like a really sort of harsh reality at the time. But then it became this like crazy, weird obsession. And I feel like it's a very stereotypical story at this point, whereas like I was the CLO for a very large company. And I started my studies, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to quit. I'm just going to quit my job, and I'm going to deep dive into everything. And what I recognize, and maybe some of you guys can sort of relate to this too, is that there's a lot of snake oil in the industry of learning and development. And I wanted to be incredibly credible. I wanted to actually know what I was doing. So I started collecting credentials, and it was so hard. It was so hard because I hadn't studied like this before. I hadn't taught, like, I never knew anything about my brain. I never knew, like, science and mathematics. We broke up in grade 11, and it was like an epic breakup. So I never like knew any of these things. But when I went through the process, my first classes at Harvard, I realized, holy moly, I don't know how to learn properly. This is incredibly hard. Went through all of that sort of emotional turmoil of like, I don't think I can do this, because I was past the age of 35. And when you pass the age of 35, your neural networks and what you know in there is so strong that it's very hard to change. And even if we do have some previous knowledge of things, that almost makes it worse. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. So I've done all of these wonderful credentials. And then I integrated myself into the scientific community as well. So I've got privileges to attend rounds. But what was very important, and the reason why I'm showing you all this, is because what I'm noticing right now is that there's a lot of crap coming out. There's a lot of myth. There's a lot of misinformation. And if you do your due diligence and look at the credentials of the people who are putting this out there, they don't have them. So this is just kind of like that announcement to show you I am credible. I have taken several years of, almost 8 years of studying and accumulating my knowledge, and put a board of advisors around me that is growing by the day. And these guys are some of the best nerds on the planet. I just love them so hard. And they keep me honest, so that whatever I say to you today, whatever I put out as work or social media, it's validated, and making sure that misinformation is not being spread, especially by me. You might have noticed there's a tattoo on my arm. It says YARR. And this is pretty much how I say everything that I need to say in life. But what it really stands for is this: it's "you are really ready." And that comes from my own journey of being terrified. I'm sure we've all had that experience of like, when you're studying something. It was my first Harvard exam, and it was online, and I was at the last question, and I knew I was going to instantly get my results. So I was terrified, like just hovering over my mouse, because I was like, oh my God, if I don't pass this, like all the horrible things going on in my head. But then I did, and I screamed this word out so loud. And I just have to say, like, I've used this word since I was a kid. But in that moment, I was like, holy moly, what does that mean? I'm like, this is what this means. It's like, Lauren, you have got this. You are ready. Go tell everybody. And that's what the YARR is. And it's kind of sort of an ideology behind Learning Pirate. It's also a lot of fun to be on stage in front of like 2,000 people and get them to scream YARR. So it's just a fun little activity. So that's kind of the professional side of what I do. There is the personal story behind this as well. And that was my grandmother, Lillian. She was my heart. She was my freaking soul. And she passed 4 years ago at one of the best hospitals here in Toronto, which was attached to the Research Institute, who took me under their wings. So when I did medical neuroscience, which I had no intentions of doing, by the way, it was because she was suffering, she was aging, but she started to really go downhill with her dementia. And I just needed to understand what's happening to her, what's happening in her brain, and how do I connect with her, or how do I communicate with her? When she looked out the window and she told me that there's a bear on the sidewalk, but that bear was a garbage can. So, how could I just understand? And we had a very cool routine, her and I. She was at the hospital. I would go visit twice a week, and I would lean down, so she's in her wheelchair, and she would be sleeping, and I'd tap her on the shoulder, and she'd be like, "Lauren," and I'd be like, "Hi," and she'd be like, "You didn't tell me you were coming," and my response was always, "Well, if I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise." And this went on for years, and then the last the last times that happened, she woke up, she's like, "Lauren," and the whole thing, but then she had a stroke. Literally right in front of my eyes. And knowing what I know, if you guys have seen the movie The Matrix, and you know how you see all the codes and stuff like that, it's almost like I could see that happening in her brain, and I knew what was about to happen. And it was probably the most devastating moment of my life. But the last word that woman ever uttered was my name. And to be able to then take her through the last week of her life and understand how to just give her all the love and everything that I could do as she passed. I couldn't have been more fortunate to understand about my own brain and her brain, and to know how to have that experience. So something that was very sad actually turned into something beautiful. So, YARR, let's move on. Because we're here to talk about learning. We're here to talk about the brain. And I just want you to sit back and freaking relax. The pressure is off you. You're going to learn nothing today. Zero. Because that's not how this works. The brain just doesn't work like this. Now, Stefan, I'm going to need your help, because I need to know from everybody in the chat. Have you ever been in an MRI before? Have you ever had a scan done before? I'm just going to need yeses or nos.
Well, we got 50-50 split right now. There's a few more no's coming in, but there's 4 or 5 people that have had one.
Okay, cool. So for those of you who have had one, and I think everybody else knows kind of what they look like, this is the sort of homage to science. Now, in 1977 is when the first MRI was built, and it was by this man, Dr. Damadian, the one with the mustache, and his grad student, the one in the bow tie. Now, this is the crazy part about science and how far we have come in technology to be able to look into the brain. Because his grad student in that second photo, he's got that air conditioner unit around his chest, and he looks pretty calm, cool, and relaxed. But then they take his shirt off, and he's starting to look a little bit scared. So I wanted to show you this, because 1977, yeah, it was a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago. And it took us a little bit longer to get to probably what you guys went into when you did your scans, which is one of these. And because of that, we can now look way further into the brain and do all these fun things like scan and watch movement and blood flow. And this basically helps us to understand where in the brain is blood flow going, and that shows us activation. So we can now understand through a learning and memory standpoint, when we're doing a cognitive task, or when we're trying to recall a memory and we're in the scanners, we can see those parts of the brain activating. And that's how we're discovering more and more about what these magical things can do. And obviously, they're helping to come up with solutions to things like, not solutions, but at least ways that we can understand neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, more about ADD, ADHD, everything that falls under sort of the neurodiverse community as well. So that's the cool part of science. I'm not going to nerd out with you on that anymore. I want to know about you. So get ready in the chat, because I would really love to know, what are you amazing at? Okay, so maybe you're amazing at baking, like this person was. They made this crazy cake that I could never do. But Stefan, what are our friends here amazing at?
The question is now in the chat, and we'll slowly get a few answers in, probably in just a few moments.
Yeah, I know we're on a little bit of a delay. That gives me time to drink my greens.
We got some typing going on.
This is one of my favorite things. It's looking at what everybody's amazing at. Someone the other day I was doing this said they were amazing at poorly singing, and I was like, that's amazing.
Sweet. All right. Yelena saying keeping my plants alive, I guess.
Oh my God,
That
come
is
over.
absolutely
Please come
amazing, because
over.
I kill mine all the time.
I know, come over.
Running thought experiments for Nitin, being a mom for Alexandra, Casey planning amazing vacations, Delphine is great at whistling, Candy
Oh,
is an amazing cook, Jasmine as well, Katie, empathy and curiosity, Poe is patience, Georgina is falling asleep quickly. I hope it's not happening here. Jessica, understanding things if I'm really interested in them. And
you're awesome.
Depti is seconding Yelena, which was keeping plants alive.
Okay, first of all, you guys get the award for some of the most original responses that I've heard, and I've done this a lot. So so let's see if you're just as creative. What are you not so amazing at? Now check this one out. This would be my version of this cake. Looks like Ariel had like a really hard night. So what are you not so great at?
Not amazing at math, we've got. Math again. Handcraft.
Oh yeah.
Keeping plants alive. Making time for myself. Cooking. Knitting. Painting. Details. Patience. Executing action plans.
This is amazing. Okay, so
Working out.
as those are coming in, we'll keep them because I just want to be mindful of time. We've got a lot to get through. My guess is, I'm just going to make the assumption based on the millions of times that I've done this before, is that you found this mildly amusing. Maybe you had a little good chuckle, especially at that like horrible Ariel cake. So what was this about? Okay. Everything that's about to happen in the next 40 minutes is all scientifically based. Now that was really about emotions, my friends, and feelings. So emotional reactivity. And we know that emotions are basically part of almost every cognitive function that we have. Now, what's wrapping around on your screen right there is the prefrontal cortex. It's right here, right behind your foreheads. It's the last part of your brain to start, to stop cooking around 25 years old. So like all of those epic, stupid things that you did when you were teenagers is because this thing wasn't fully functioning yet. And it governs your problem solving, your behavior, your goal setting, your ability to focus. Now, where it's very interesting when it comes to learning is we need all of our brain to learn, but the emotion part of it is what you're about to discover is that this is a simulation of an amygdala hijack. And the amygdala is a very, very tiny, everything in your brain is tiny, but this is the emotional processing center of your brain. And there's one on either side. And when we have too much stress, we want some stress in learning because that's actually we want that neurochemistry, the norepinephrine. We actually want some of that when we're learning. We want the challenge, we want to feel it. But if we were overstressed and we pass the threshold, then the executive function gets taken offline and we can't focus, which means we cannot learn effectively. And we certainly can't create that memory pathway that we're going to need. So, when we talk about making learning fun, yes, we want to make learning fun, but we also need to make it challenging, but not so challenging that we've stressed out the learners and now they can't think properly. Novelty is amazing as well. The brain loves novelty. But again, when we put too much of it in, the brain goes to a place of expecting to find it or expecting to see it. So for my designers out there, I get it. We want to have fun, like we want to do fun trainings. But if you're using it too much, the brain is going to start bypassing the information they really need to learn just to seek the novelty. And that's dopamine for you.
There's 2 questions in there. Would you want to have them now or later?
Are they relevant to what I'm saying?
Prefrontal cortex, is that the one that's fully developed by the age of 25?
Roughly around 25. Yeah, give or take a couple years.
Is it the same for children? A little stress is good for learning?
Yeah, it is. The only difference is that because kids don't have, as we're developing, they don't have the abilities to harness their executive function yet. I'm advocating so hard to teach this in schools, by the way. So yeah, it is. But the thing is, kids learn in a completely different way because they don't have the same levels of stress that we do at all. So great questions. Was there another one or can I keep going?
No, that's it for now.
Okay, so emotion was the first part of that sort of what are you amazing, what are you not amazing at? The second part of that was this. For a split second, you had to think, you had to go into your mind to go, what am I good at? What am I not good at? And in that moment, you were quote unquote thinking about what you were thinking about. And this is the beautiful theory and skill of metacognition, which is the ability to analyze your own thoughts and to analyze your own performance. Now, a very easy way that I like to describe this is we want you to become the audience to your own performance. And in order to do that, we have to make someone consciously aware in the moment, which is not an easy task because that requires focus. Now, this is incredibly valuable for you just as an everyday human being, because, this is like when you can stop in the moment, like me, right? I'm sure you've all had this experience where you're late to go meet some friends or to get to an event and you're like frantic, right? You're like, where's my phone? Where's my keys? Where's my hat? Where's like whatever? And you're running around. And meantime, like your phone's in your hand, your glasses are on top of your head. When we're able to recognize that moment and pause and down regulate, whether that's through a quick breath, we bring the executive function back online to focus and go, okay, I know what's going on here. And we want that in learning, but we have to be more intentional when we're doing it with learning and learning design. So we want you to regularly be able to monitor these three things. What do you know? What don't you know? And what you think you know. That last one is the most critical, right? Because when you think about it, we blast through learning so quickly. And part of what I do as a scientist is as a scientific learning designer, which means I'm taking everything that I know about not only the brain and how it works, but all of the methodology and the theory from cognitive psychology and putting those together. So when I think about using metacognition and how do I embed that into my designs, I'm really focusing on what someone thinks they know, because that's often when they get to the end of the learning, they try to do something and they realize they didn't actually learn it. So we want people to be able to monitor and regulate these three things. And the way that we do that, excuse me, is to embed. We want to embed these sort of traps, right? I like this visual, right? It's like, oh God, you got me, right? It's like we trap them with either a question or a prompt where their brain is like, I got this, I know this, but then you show them, actually, you didn't. So you can be a little bit sneaky when you're creating your learning. And when you're doing it for yourself, you want to intermittently do this as well, because I do it too. I'll like blast through something sometimes and I have to stop and be like, wait a second, I'm going too fast. I actually didn't absorb that. I need to be much more intentional about the way that I'm going about my learning. And this is a very simple thing that you can do to help with that process, whether you're doing it for yourself or whether you're creating for others. So what do you know? What don't you know? And what do you think you know? That's your first sort of like high level, like take that away for the day moment. Now, very simple task. 10 seconds. Close your eyes. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Go ahead and open. It's nice to close your eyes for a few seconds, isn't it? Without thinking, get your hands ready in the chat. Without thinking, I want you to write down what comes to mind when you see the next word pop up on your screen. Go.
So here we go. Brain, fun, growth, passion, fast, fun, brain development, play, reading development, growth, hard, experience,
Amazing.
getting out of comfort zone.
This is great. Okay, keep your hands on above your things. Okay, now questions. Yes or no? Did anyone ever teach you how to learn?
Well, that's an easy prompt. There's a yes in here. There's 2 yeses in here.
Okay.
The rest of them are no's.
Yeah, I
And
know.
YouTube.
I have asked this to, holy moly, guys, holy crap. Well over 100,000 people now, just from like interactions like this, keynotes, everything. 90%, 98% of the time, it's a no. Okay. Now, to those of you who said yes, did anyone ever teach you about your brain? I'm going to be very happy if they did.
We got two yeses coming in and a no.
Oh, fabulous.
More people typing yes because we're part of studies. Yes.
Love
yes
it.
in 8th grade. Yes.
Okay. Well, let's go into it. Let's just like, for those, let's do a recap for those of you who have learned a little bit about it. And let's just like show you some remarkable things about these things for those of you who haven't. So how does this thing work? How does it actually work? Like, there's a lot going on in here, in like your 3 pounds of like meatloaf, essentially. So three parts that make up what you know as neurons, right? You've got these tree branch-like structures called dendrites, the cell body, which is like a circle if you want to follow along on your hand. And then your arm represents these like highways of fibers called axons. Now, tree branches grow out of the circles that represent your learning and your memories and your experiences. And then what happens is they start as a, what's it called? Electrical response that turns into a chemical one. Now, when these chemicals get into the center of the circle, if the charge is strong enough from an electricity point of view, it will release and then shoot down and send a signal to the neighboring neuron. And this happens over and over and over and over again at speeds we can't even like, you couldn't even see it. That happens so quickly. Now you've got 86 billion of these things up here. They're crammed up in there. And this is one that I drew, which is a crappy drawing, but when you put it all together, you can have thousands, 5 to 7, dendrites that are attached to thousands and thousands and thousands of other neurons. And it looks like this. This is a real neuron. This is one from the back of, this is the visual center, I think, a retinal neuron. So, and it's connecting with many different neurons, right? So this is just one. Look how much action is going on in there. And for those of you who, this might be something new for you on this next screen, we grow these. This is what happens, okay? Check this out. So the one on the top right is an irregular neuron, so it's not growing the dendrites, but I want you to sort of absorb that for a second. You grow this. If you've never met me before, you've never seen me before, you've never heard my voice, you would start to grow a tree branch that represents Lauren. Now, the one thing that's crazy about this is that this time started at, the video starts at Wednesday and it ends on a Friday, and it still hadn't attached to anything. Now, that one was grown in a Petri dish. So, and yeah, we can do that, which is crazy. But the whole point here is that learning takes time. To create that process, the true human process of growing something in your head to represent an experience, it takes time. In the chat, are you good? Blowing your minds yet? Because we're not done yet.
Slowly typing. Yes, that was cool. Thumbs up.
Awesome.
Yes. Confirmations coming in.
Amazing. So let's go even further. Let's get even more micro. This is also this is a real neuron as well. This neuron with all those yellow and red dots, those are your synapses. Now, we hear a lot about neuroplasticity. Synaptic plasticity isn't as spoken about, but it is so much, like, it's not so much more important, but it's like really, really important, because it's not all, I'd say most of the communication between your cells is happening at these like sprinkle-like levels. And it's their ability to change, which is central to all learning and behavior modification. So these are these contact points where one neuron can communicate with another one. And basically those tree branches, they are covered in these. I like to show people like my hand covered in sprinkles, just to kind of get a visual on that. But synaptic plasticity is really controlling how effectively two neurons are talking to one another. And so it's the strength in the communication that is really allowing us to modify our behaviors and to learn. This particular neuron is from a mouse, actually. It's from a mouse, and it's from the hippocampus, which is on the side, deep inside the side of your head. And the hippocampus is best known for long-term memory, mostly like episodic memory. So what is learning? If it's not, the absorption of knowledge and content, then what is learning? This is learning, guys. This video right here is real from inside someone's head. Learning is this manipulation, it's the creation, it's the movement, it's the destruction, it's the remapping of all of these pathways. And as you can see, look at the time marker at the bottom right, this is constantly happening. Now, every time you learn something new and you practice it, your brain is either going to change the structure of the neurons, or it's going to increase the number of the synapses and the communication so that it's receiving it faster. This is a lot. Look at that, 131 hours. Do you see how much crazy just happened in that little tiny piece of brain? I could watch this all day, every day, but how are you guys doing? Is this cool? Are you mesmerized? Are you like, are you questioning the existence of your humanity?
We got a high 10 and some so interesting heart emojis, brain emojis, fire emojis, thumbs up.
Woo!
We've got it going.
All right. Let's go. Okay. So now that you know, basically, as you're sitting here and just interacting with all of this, that all of that is happening up there in your brain. I hope this already has like changed your perception of just the world and learning in itself. All right. Close your eyes. Breath in. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Open up. So I'm hitting you with a lot in a very short period of time, and I'm completely going against, like, you know, I'm overloading you, which is like, it's everything that you should not be doing, by the way. These little pauses, though, are incredibly important. Now, this is another design tip for you. If you design in and there's no rhyme or reason to where you do it, you just can't overuse anything. But when we put these pauses in, what happens is that neurons in that hippocampus area I was telling you about, one of those long-term memory areas, what happens is the area of the brain that's involved in the learning and the memory, it engages in the same pattern. So that same activity. So if you think that the individual neurons, when you're learning, they're kind of getting stamped of like, okay, I think I'm supposed to remember this. And as we practice and rehearse it, they will sort of build the pathway and build that network, and they get stronger. But when we stop for 10 seconds, what's happening is you're getting 10 times the neural repetition. So we're getting that 10 times activation of the same neurons. The problem with us in learning is we don't pause, we don't stop. So another design tip is like exactly what I've done to you in this presentation. Build it in, give that brain the break, and let those repetitions happen. Because ideally, what we're trying to do is this. We are trying to, now this is the brain of a child, but we are trying to, even as adult learners, to activate, create pathways. And what you're looking at here, this child was probably in kindergarten and they were trying to learn how to read and do their phonetics. But the point of you seeing this is the MRI, this is an fMRI. An fMRI shows us the blood flow, and the blood flow shows us activation in the particular areas of the brain. So the purples and the blues are the lower activations, the reds and the oranges, those are the higher activations. Now, before the learning, you see there's not much engagement in that area of the brain. But after they've learned, we've got it. We've got that blood flow. We know those neurons are firing. So, and this is what learning really is. It's making those connections to activate those specific areas of the brain. I love this stuff. I don't know if you guys are like nerding out with me on this too, but like, I love it. Okay, question. On a scale of 1 to 10, let's just do 1 to 10. If I showed you something, let's go high. If I showed you something 100 times, do you think you could remember it? Yes or no?
We got yeses coming in. Yes, yes, yes.
Great. Okay. Here's your next. You're very confident. Without Googling, can you tell me which is the right Google? Put the number of the correct Google in the chat. And if most of you are getting this right, I'm going to totally know that you're cheating.
Six, 5, 1, 6, 6, 6, 5, 1, or 6, 2.
Okay.
6.
Okay, first of all, thank you for not cheating. The actual answer is 5. And you, my friends, just got Googled. So this was one of those beautiful little experiments. Now, there was a bit of a trap. I completely messed with you a little bit. But the purpose of this is to show that it's a great demonstration that just because you're exposed to something, it doesn't mean that you have processed it deeply. So what it shows us is that we can see something repeatedly without deep processing it. So the information fails to become an encoded memory. So I love when I go into an office and they're trying to, whether it's like a safety thing or it's just like a human resource stuff, and they make all these flyers and they're in the kitchen and they're at your cubicle. You go into the bathroom and they're in the bathroom, and then like no one really knows what's on those. You see them everywhere all the time because it wasn't learned. It wasn't deep processes. So it really reinforces the importance of those metacognitive skills as well, right? Because you probably thought, you're like, okay, yeah, I've seen something like 100 times. I can know what that is. But no, we actually don't. We need to take the time to actually focus and learn, because memory is a massive, massive beast of a process. And I'm going to take you through a very quick and dirty sort of look at memory, but through the lens of psychology. Now, when we look at memory through psychology, we're going through a 3-step process. Whereas looking at it through the lens of the brain and neuroscience, I'm looking at it through like those networks and a neurochemical and electrical sort of response. So the processes for me are very different. One is at a mechanistic level and one is at more of a methodical level. So I'm going to take you through sort of the more methodical. So you might have seen this before, but we've got this process of all of the sensory information coming in. A lot of it is forgotten because our day-to-day, we don't need to remember everything. Now, when we are learning, your sweet spot is working memory. And as a designer of learning, you have to be very, very protective of this area of the work of the memory process, because your working memory, this is that limited part. You've got, it's what's it called? It is in that executive function within your prefrontal cortex, but it's limited in its capacity and in its time. So you might have heard, phone numbers that were made back in the day. There's a reason why they made them 7 digits long. Is because there's that rule of 7 plus or minus 2. So this is when you have to limit the content, be very focused in on what you want your learners to learn or yourself, and don't go over that limit because the brain just can't take it. That's all it comes to. Once we get it into the encoding process, then we want to go into long-term memory, because once we get into long-term memory, that's the idea of we should be able to retrieve it. So your 3-step process looks like this: encode, initial learning of the information. And this is when the brain is going to be expending a little bit more energy and when we need to really focus. This is our focused areas of time. So that's the initial sort of stamping of those neurons. The second process is the storage. This is when your rehearsal and you really start to need to do a lot of practice, because remember, you're creating specific networks which will represent the knowledge, the skill, the behavior, or the ability. Now, maybe you've heard the phrase, what wires together fires together, or neurons that wire together fire together. A lot of people think that was Donald Hebb. It wasn't. It was Dr. Carla Schatz from Stanford. So she's like the brilliance behind, being able to see some of how these neurons were able to be manipulated. But how we do it is just the storage and the encoding process. It's very important on how we do it. And you can play this little experiment for yourself. Now, this, I would say, is more if you were a native English speaker, or if you were learning English. When you learned the months of the year, you learned them in a very particular way. But if I asked you right now in this very moment to list the months of the year in alphabetical order, and I said, go ahead, list the months of the year right now in alphabetical order, your brain is going to struggle. Right? And you're probably sitting there going, August, April, right? It's very hard to do because the way that you learned it and the way that you encoded it created a mental model. And those models become very hard to modify. So for my designers, or for when you're learning something in general, you have to think about these things. How did the person learn it first? Because the brain is always going to go back to the stronger network. So it's always going to revert back until we show it and bring our focus to how things are different. This is why learning something that's very similar to something else is very hard, because it's really those pathways that you're competing against. So you can sort of use that one with your friends too. Hey, tell me the months of the year in alphabetical order, and they'll be like, it's fun to watch people try to do this like in person. And then the last piece of the puzzle here is that process of when you can retrieve it, right? So once it's in the long-term memory, now long-term memory doesn't necessarily last a lifetime. That doesn't hold true for everybody, but the idea is to get it to a place in your brain where we can retrieve it with little effort or, little conscious thought. Okay, so store, encode, and retrieve is the sort of simplified version of memory. Guys, memory is one of my favorite topics to research, but it does my head in because it's so complex. It is so incredibly complex, but I absolutely love it. Hands over the things, over those keyboards of yours. There's a gateway to learning. Do you have any idea what the gateway to learning is? Take a guess.
Motivation, environment, relevance.
Okay.
Self-awareness.
Ooh, good one. Close. That's kind of like this dog that I found that just kind of makes me laugh a little bit. Okay, it's not a meditating dog.
Pain. Attention. I'm gonna
Closer.
just for the sake of it, I'm gonna add emotion.
Delicious. Okay, I'm gonna skip the next experiment because we're running out of time, but that would have distracted the crap out of you. Focus. Focus is your gateway to learning. Okay, focus is your gateway to learning, but attention is your gateway to focus. Now, what you're seeing on these brains, these images of these brains up here, what I want you to understand is there are multiple attentional networks in the brain, multiple, and they all divert to different things, right? There's an alerting network, attentional network that provokes consciousness. There's spatial orientation that draws attention to our specific sensory inputs. There's executive attention, which helps you to maintain focus. There's inhibitory control. It's so many things. So focus isn't just that spotlight like we were all being told. It's actually a dimmer switch. So when the brain wants to focus on something, what it's doing is it's slowing down, it's dimming the signals of everything else so that we can actually focus. Now, if we want to change someone's brain as an adult, you have to bring focus to the particular thing that you want them to, to focus on, because there's neurochemistry that's sort of in the background there that's working. This neurochemical called acetylcholine. Now, acetylcholine is very important to help us focus, but when we sort of merge acetylcholine with that norepinephrine, which is that little bit of stress, we're in a really nice place to learn. But I want you to understand that this is the gateway to learning, and we need to practice focus. So if you're designing, or even for yourself, what I want you to think are these two things. Where do you want to guide your attention to focus? Or if you're designing, where do I want to help guide my learner's brain to focus? Okay. So if there's too much going on the screen, it's just you're looking at things, or there's music going on, there's things popping up on videos. It's just too much. How is someone supposed to draw their attention to that one thing? So ask, and in your day-to-day, when you start to drift, you can just stop every once in a while and go, where's my attention? Be like, oh, I'm supposed to be working on this thing, but I'm actually looking over there at my coworker or getting a coffee. Oh, that coffee looks really good. I want one too. Like, ask yourself these things during the day, and it will help you to start strengthen your ability to focus. And there's lots of other little experiments that you can do with yourself to strengthen your attentional networks to be able to harness your attention to focus. But as a learning designer, as somebody in learning, even as what I've done here on the screen, just bringing the attention using a color visual, that's cool. You can use a visual cue, you can use an auditory cue. It's going to be up to you to decide how you're going to design that in. I'm going to skip this. It would have been an experiment because I want to wrap up right now and just give us a chance to hang out and chat. But one of the most important steps, the most critical steps to creating a memory. Actually, do you guys want to take a guess? What's the most, one of the most important things that you need to do in order to create a memory? Let's see if you can come up with the answer to this.
connecting it with a previous experience, emotion, repetition, association,
Yep, those are
something
all
that sticks with you, between what we knew and what we're learning, visualize, connect, associate, adding it to the schema,
oof.
emotional attachments.
Okay. Those are all great, but the most important thing is sleep and rest. Okay. Memory is triggered by the act of learning, but consolidation of memory happens when you're either in deep rest or sleep. Now, unfortunately, we don't have the luxury during when we're at work. I've done this before in sessions and workshop sessions that I've brought to companies, especially when they're like doing it in the afternoon. I'm like, okay, I can do this, but I'm gonna insert a 15 to 20 minute rest in the session. Are you okay with that? And I did this for this like massive, this is the best story, guys. I did this for this massive company in the US. And I told them I was going to do this. And quite honestly, I was kind of tired myself too. So I was excited. I've never seen 50 adults, 50, run to go under tables and lie down on the floor so fast. It was like they were in heaven. And we had this music. I had like binaural beats on, and they were like, one guy was out for the count. We actually had to wake him up. But that 20 minutes of like a little bit of rest to get the consolidation, to get the repetition of the neurons in the brain. This is how memory is consolidated. So that's why sleep is incredibly important, just like in your everyday life too. Like sleep is, you hear this all the time, but it is critical for us as functioning human beings and for the process of learning and memory. So, what did you learn today? Just as the recap, you learned nothing. I hope you understand that the process doesn't work that fast, but you'll probably have some cool dreams tonight, or maybe you're like stimulated with curiosity just to understand a little bit about these gorgeous brains of ours, because the science lends us so much to us as human beings to know about ourselves and to our professions as learning development professionals. And yeah, if you want to find me, I'm most active on LinkedIn because I just like having fun, just calling things out and just really messing with the industry. And I'll put a link in the chat where you can go ahead. Everything that we did today, you can get a recap of with the series Joining Forces with Your Brain, which is currently open and free for the first 5 chapters, because you guys the world needs to know about their brains. And that's my gift to everybody. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can like stop just staring at myself and the screen and come back to you guys.
Awesome.
Close this.
Well, first off, thank you, Lauren. Just hear Georgina saying, luckily, she's great at falling asleep quickly.
That will do well for you in life, Georgina.
Yeah. So I'm going to pull up a few of the questions that have been given throughout the session. About half an hour ago, you were talking about how does the stress factor of your brain become engaged with multitasking? And we're thinking here of learners that may cause unintentional stress aside from being distracted.
So multitasking isn't a thing, not to the brain at least. What happens is when you look at someone who's like the attempt of multitasking is actually in the brain, it's task switching, because the brain can't send like multiple signals to do multiple things. So it's a very small process in the brain of you task switching, not actually multitasking. So let me just absorb this. The stress response, especially when we are learning something brand new, it just bubbles up. Almost, unless you're like super motivated and super excited, at some point that is actually, your body or your mind's going to go into a little bit of stress, because you're like, what is this? I don't understand. That moment of I don't understand is the stress response. Now, if we are regulating that, and now I'm going to go to the other side of that question, which is a lot of people, myself included, until I started studying, we're never taught how to down regulate. And what that means is when we are active in that amygdala, when we are having a reaction to something, how do we tell the executive function that everything is okay and we just need to calm stuff down so that we can focus again? 2 techniques to do that. 1, breath. And it has to be slow, intentional breath, because if you're activating a state of stress and you're starting to breathe like almost to the point of hyperventilation, you're increasing the epinephrine, you're increasing the adrenaline, which is just going to keep you in a heightened state of stress. So the slower, hold it. And actually, this is really, if you guys want to try this, oh my God, I love this so hard. This is new. So there's 4 different types of breath to help you down regulate, but the strongest one right now is it called not cyclic. I'm going to forget the name and I'll come back to it, but I'll show you how to do it. So you take a big breath in through your nose as much as you can. And then when you get to the point that you don't think you can do it anymore, go 2 more, and then let that out to the full extent. Ideally, you want to do that for like 5 minutes, but if you don't have that much time, because it's a lot to do, is you can just keep repeating that. And I will find the actual name. You know what? I bet you the paper is like on my table here somewhere. I can't see it right now. But that's a great way to down regulate that stress response. And you can encourage, if there's other people who are sort of activating that, then yeah, you can also like encourage everybody else to, hey, let's take a breath. 4 square breathing. You're talking about box breathing. No, it's different than box breathing, but box breathing is also another good one. So box breathing is the inhale for 4, hold for 4, release for 4, hold for 4. They call it box because like you can visualize like a box going around. Yeah, Georgina, I've been teaching my nephew and my nieces since they were 3 years old. And it's made a significant difference in them as little humans. I mean, don't get me wrong, they can still be little assholes at times, but like, they're handfuls. Oh. Let's just keep it real, right?
All right. So Nitin was asking, fight, flight, freeze, faint, fawn, fix, those are standard responses. How do these influence learners and learning?
Well, that's the amygdala, right? So that's that amygdala response. So basically, we have as a learning designer, it's not an easy task to try to figure out what's in everybody else's brains. Like, I don't know if I'm going to trigger a memory of something that's going to take somebody in a bad direction versus the other person's going to be taken in a good direction. So when we're learning, we want to engage. You are engaging the emotional processing centers, right? Because it is very active in our cognitive functions. But it's a matter of, are we overstimulating, like I said, when it comes to the novelty and the fun? Or if we're using examples, now this is an important one because a lot of companies are now focusing on mental health and psychological safety without realizing, and this scares me actually, because there's a lot of organizations who have brought these programs in, but they're being run by people who don't have the background knowledge to be facilitating these things. And I can give you a really good example is a facilitator, they were doing, it was something on psychological safety. And in their deck, as they were going through what was meant to be like a funny visual, like GIF, it was of like this, it was of a little girl who was like, like, I can't remember what it was, but she was in front of a burning house. And it was whatever it was, like, it should have been like kind of funny. But this was right after the war in the Ukraine started. And it did not, it triggered almost the entire room. And the stress was like, can you imagine? Like, it was so uncomfortable for me as well, right? So it was, when it comes fight, flight, fawn, all of those things, Nitin, that you're asking about, we have to be very consciously aware of the fact that when we're designing learning and when we're designing something that we want to add in some component of emotion, just to have that conscious awareness of everybody else's memories. And we're not going to be able to protect everyone, but we should at least try. So be aware of the images that you're using, or the words that you're saying, especially when it's sensitive. Bye, Wendy. Thanks for coming.
All right. We got our last two questions here still in the chat. I'd love to go through them and then we'll come to a close. You were showing the image of the child's brain at that time, once they've done the learning. Yelena asks, what is the difference between lower and higher activations?
So what you saw on that picture, it was just the blood flow. So that's how we can actually see which areas of the brain are being activated. So that's all that those images were. So previously, when the child was learning, we wouldn't have seen that much blood flow, and the blood flow is showing us the activation of the actual cells. But then once they started to learn and those networks and those neurons started to fire together, then we could see the blood flow. So that's what that was.
Okay.
fMRIs were stupidly cool. Like the pictures that I showed you, you should see like the new technology, like they can go so much more microscopic into the brain. I'm dying to get into somebody's lab. Bye, Ella. I'm going to share this with you guys if you wanted. Oh, no, that's not the right thing. That was a picture.
And then lastly, Tivo was asking, what about the somatic side of learning?
Ooh, into the body we go. Yeah, I mean, that is, I mean, how do you want it to find like in what context, right? Like, because obviously somatics are, we're attached to a body. So what like specifically did you want to know? Maybe that's like a whole other can of worms, right? Because like we've got like somatic when it comes to memory, right? We've got somatic to basically those psychological effects that can either be triggered because of trauma. We've got, yeah, so this is a little bit of a loaded question. Oh, that's a good question. What's the best learning experience you've had in terms of meeting the brain on its own terms apart from yours? Whew. You know, it's interesting. I used to be super scared, not scared, looking at a real brain and watching it be dissected or being operated on it's pretty intense. So I'd say, yeah, like that was pretty like meta, if you will. Like the fascinating things and the coolest things about us as human beings, we are the only species that can study itself. It's when you think about that and how privileged we are, to me, that's kind of like the meta awareness of us as a human being. So there's so many great learning experiences that I've had, but honestly, Delphine, like this information, as much as I started this journey because I wanted to be a better learning designer, I wanted to be like a scientist, all of that was great. And I love all that, but the profound ways that it changes you as a human being to learn all of these things about yourself it's really the win here. So even with the series, even everything that I do, I always say, yeah, we're going to talk about learning. We're going to contextualize it in learning. But when you peel back all that away, this is about us as human beings, how we function, how we operate, and then how we can transfer all of that into any of the work that we do.
All right. And with that, we'll come to a close.
YARR. Thanks, guys. I hope that you'll check out the series. Please do. Like it'll be a really good recap of everything that we did today. Stefan, I don't know if we're going to send that out to everybody. I just put it in the links. Like I said, follow me on LinkedIn if you want to see a pirate cause a big stink soon. I'm going to blow some things up in our industry. Right here, honey. And I'll see you guys in the comments there too.
Thank you again, Lauren, and thank you everybody else for joining us for this ThoughtLab. Catch you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Stefan, thanks so much. Bye, Georgina. Oh, did this not go to the...